God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. When Friedrich Nietzsche penned these words in 1882, he offered not a celebration, but a profound diagnosis that has only grown more relevant with time. A philosophical prophecy unfolding in real time within our modern consciousness. This declaration represents far more than some simplistic atheistic slogan or mere religious provocation. It stands as one of the most penetrating insights into the spiritual condition of contemporary humanity. Nietzsche was issuing a warning about the collapse of the entire metaphysical framework that had structured Western civilization for 2 millennia, the terrifying erosion of the transcendent certainties that had anchored human existence, given meaning to suffering, and provided a cosmic context for our moral choices. The death of God signifies nothing less than the evaporation of absolute morality, the dissolution of guaranteed purpose, and the abandonment of any claim to eternal objective truth. This catastrophic unmooring from divine anchors has created a pervasive existential vacuum that manifests as the quiet desperation you feel beneath the surface of your seemingly normal life. The inexplicable anxiety that persists despite your material comfort. The sense of profound disconnection that haunts you even when surrounded by others. The haunting question that echoes in the silence between your thoughts. We have become ghosts in our own stories, performing roles we don't believe in for an audience that isn't watching, desperately trying to fill this spiritual void with digital noise, consumerist pursuits, and therapeutic solutions that merely treat symptoms without addressing the fundamental crisis of meaning. What makes Nietzsche's diagnosis so brilliant is his recognition that we are both the perpetrators and victims of this metaphysical crime. We have murdered God through our relentless pursuit of scientific truth, our embrace of rational skepticism, and our hunger for individual autonomy, yet we now find ourselves orphaned in a universe without parental guidance, terrified by the very freedom we demanded. This paradox defines our modern condition. We possess unprecedented power to shape our world, yet feel increasingly powerless to answer why we should bother. We have more choices than any generation in history, yet lack the criteria to choose wisely. We worship at the altar of personal freedom, yet find ourselves enslaved to algorithms, trends, and manufactured desires. The death of God has left us adrift in an infinite cosmic ocean without compass or destination, trying to navigate by stars that have been revealed as distant explosions rather than divine markers. And the profound disorientation you feel is not some personal failing, but the inevitable consequence of this collective spiritual shipwreck. Nietzsche understood that this crisis represented both our greatest tragedy and our ultimate opportunity, the chance to finally grow up as a species and take responsibility for creating meaning rather than merely discovering it, for building values rather than receiving them, for becoming the authors of our own existence rather than characters in a story written by some absent divine author.
We have constructed a world meticulously engineered to flee from silence, a society that functions as a collective distraction machine, generating endless noise to shield us from confronting the void within. Your day begins not with introspection, but with a cascade of notifications, a digital chorus pulling your attention outward before you've even had a moment to turn inward. It progresses as a curated performance of productivity, a relentless pursuit of optimized living where every minute is accounted for, every experience documented and shared, yet somehow devoid of genuine substance. You fall into bed each night carrying a fatigue that is more than physical. It is existential, the profound weariness that comes from running a race without a finish line, from performing a play without a plot. This is the grand paradox of our age. We are more connected than any generation in history, yet we drown in an ocean of loneliness. We have conquered material scarcity for millions, yet we face an epidemic of spiritual poverty. We possess unlimited access to information, yet we starve for wisdom. We were promised that technological progress, economic growth, and personal freedom would inevitably lead to fulfillment. Yet now that we have unprecedented comfort and convenience, we find ourselves asking with increasing desperation, is this all there is? The modern world has created what philosopher Erich Fromm called the illusion of individuality. We believe ourselves to be autonomous architects of our destiny while following cultural scripts written by invisible hands. We choose from predetermined options, mistaking them for genuine choices. We express ourselves through branded identities, thinking we reveal our authentic selves. And we measure our worth through external validation, likes, promotions, possessions, while feeling increasingly hollow inside. This is the existential vacuum, the silent scream of a soul that has everything it was told to want, but nothing it truly needs. Our consumer economy thrives on manufacturing desires to fill this void, offering solutions to needs it helped create. Selling meaning is just another product. Even our spirituality has been commodified, reduced to self-improvement hacks, mindfulness apps, and wellness trends that treat symptoms while ignoring the disease. We attempt to anesthetize our anxiety with shopping sprees, numb our disconnection with social media validation, and silence our questions with entertainment overload. Yet the vacuum persists because it is fundamental, not incidental. Nietzsche saw that we had not only lost our way, but had lost the very map that could show us the way. And now we wander through a landscape of plenty while experiencing profound spiritual famine. This is the modern condition: abundance without purpose, freedom without direction, and connection without communion. A magnificent, glittering illusion that crumbles the moment we stop long enough to truly look at it.
To truly comprehend the shattering weight of Nietzsche's declaration, we must move beyond the superficial interpretation that reduces it to a mere atheistic catchphrase, and instead recognize it as perhaps the most psychologically penetrating and culturally prescient statement in modern philosophy. When Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he was engaging in a radical metaphorical archaeology, excavating the deepest foundations of Western consciousness to reveal that our entire civilization had been built upon a fundamental premise that was now crumbling beneath our feet. This God represents far more than a specific deity or religious figure. It symbolizes the entire metaphysical infrastructure that had supported human existence for 2 millennia. The belief in an objective moral order, the conviction that human life possesses intrinsic meaning, the faith that reality ultimately makes sense according to some divine or rational plan. Nietzsche understood that this metaphysical framework, what philosopher Charles Taylor would later call the cosmic imaginary, had provided the invisible architecture for everything from our ethical systems to our artistic aspirations, from our political institutions to our most personal sense of identity. The terrifying profundity of Nietzsche's insight lies in his recognition that we ourselves have become the executioners of this foundation. Through our relentless pursuit of scientific truth, our embrace of democratic leveling, our capitalist dismantling of traditional values, and our technological domination of nature, we have systematically undermined the very premises that made God plausible. This is not something that happened to us, but something we have done. And now we must live with the catastrophic consequences of our own intellectual honesty. The horror of this realization is captured brilliantly in Nietzsche's parable of the madman, who arrives in the marketplace shouting that we have killed God without understanding the magnitude of our deed. We are like children who have burned down their own house without considering where they will sleep in the freezing night. The death of God means that humanity now stands naked before an indifferent universe, forced to confront the terrifying truth that there are no divine commandments to guide us, no cosmic justice to ensure virtue is rewarded, no ultimate purpose to our suffering, and no eternal salvation for our souls. This revelation triggers what Nietzsche identified as the crisis of nihilism.
Not just the philosophical position that nothing matters, but the psychological state of collapse that occurs when our highest values devalue themselves, when our most cherished ideals are exposed as fictions, when the gravitational pull that gave direction to our lives suddenly vanishes. We now inhabit the eerie silence left by God's absence, trying to maintain the pretense of business as usual while secretly suspecting that our moral language has become meaningless, our aspirations groundless, and our achievements ultimately pointless. This is the devastating depth of Nietzsche's proclamation. It represents not just the death of a belief, but the unraveling of the very fabric of meaning that has structured human experience for centuries, leaving us simultaneously liberated from illusion and condemned to freedom, responsible for creating values in a universe that offers none.
Contemporary society relentlessly promotes the dangerous illusion that suffering represents a system failure, a deviation from the optimally curated life we are all meant to be living. We are conditioned from childhood to pursue comfort, avoid pain, and medicate away distress, creating what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the smooth society, where everything difficult, challenging, or painful is systematically eliminated in favor of frictionless consumption and effortless existence. Yet Nietzsche, with unparalleled psychological insight, recognized this desperate flight from suffering as perhaps our greatest modern pathology, a catastrophic misunderstanding of human nature that leaves us fragile, superficial, and ill-equipped to confront life's inevitable tragedies. He understood that suffering is not the enemy of human flourishing, but its essential prerequisite, the very crucible in which the soul is tempered, strengthened, and transformed. This is not some masochistic glorification of pain, but a profound recognition that just as fire purifies gold and pressure creates diamonds, suffering possesses the unique alchemical power to burn away our illusions, shatter our complacency, and force us to confront truths we would otherwise spend our lives avoiding. The comfortable lies we tell ourselves, that we are fundamentally good, that the universe cares about our happiness, that justice always prevails, cannot survive genuine encounter with profound suffering, which acts as the ultimate reality principle, stripping away our sentimentalities and forcing us to see ourselves and the world with unflinching clarity. Nietzsche witnessed how his contemporaries sought to anesthetize themselves against life's inherent difficulties through various opiates, whether religious promises of heavenly reward, philosophical systems that rationalized away pain, or the emergent culture of consumer distraction. And he recognized these escape attempts as ultimately life-denying, as ways of numbing ourselves to the full intensity of human experience. His radical alternative was to embrace suffering as what he called amor fati, the love of fate, not as passive resignation, but as active affirmation of everything life contains, the painful along with the pleasurable, recognizing that depth of character, wisdom, and genuine creativity are never born from comfort and security, but always emerge from the struggle with limitation, loss, and adversity. When we stop fleeing our suffering and instead turn to face it with courage and curiosity, we discover that what we feared would destroy us actually contains the seeds of our transformation, that in the very heart of our brokenness lies the possibility of becoming more authentic, more compassionate, and more fully human than we could ever have become without undergoing that rupture. This is why Nietzsche insisted that the greatest human achievements in art, philosophy, and spirituality have always emerged from the confrontation with suffering rather than its avoidance, and why our modern attempt to create a pain-free existence represents not progress, but a dangerous evolutionary dead end that produces what he called the last man, a being so concerned with comfort and security that he has lost the capacity for greatness altogether. The path to becoming who we are, to achieving what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, necessarily passes through the valley of shadow, through the dark night of the soul, where all our certainties collapse
and we are forced to rebuild ourselves from the ground up, having burned away everything that was false, borrowed, or inauthentic in our previous conception of ourselves. This is why the most transformative periods of human life, the initiatory crises, the dark nights of the soul, the profound losses that seem to shatter us, often later reveal themselves as the very experiences that made us who we are, the suffering without which we would have remained forever immature, forever trapped in conventional ways of thinking and being. By learning to stop viewing suffering as the enemy and instead recognizing it as the master teacher, we open ourselves to the possibility of what Nietzsche called the great health, not the absence of illness and difficulty, but the capacity to integrate all of life's experiences into a stronger, more resilient, and more affirmative way of being in the world.
The collapse of external meaning presents not a catastrophe, but the ultimate liberation, the terrifying, exhilarating freedom to become the author of your own existence, to build your values from the ground up rather than inherit them from dying traditions. This is the profound responsibility that follows the death of God, the recognition that you are condemned to freedom, as Sartre would later echo, and must now bear the weight of creating significance in a universe that offers none inherently. We stand at the most critical juncture in human consciousness, the transition from being passive recipients of meaning to active architects of meaning, from living according to scripts written by others to composing our own authentic narrative. This authorship requires what Nietzsche called the revaluation of all values, the courageous examination of every belief, assumption, and moral judgment we've inherited to determine whether it truly serves life and enhances human flourishing rather than merely comforting our fears. The journey begins with the radical acceptance that there is no destination to reach, no finished self to become, but rather an endless process of self-creation through which we give style to our character, as an artist gives form to marble, through thousands of small decisions, actions, and experiments in living. You must learn to treat your life as a work of art rather than a problem to be solved, embracing what psychologist James Hollis calls the two fundamental questions of adulthood. Who am I, apart from my history and the roles I have played? And what is asking to be born through me that only I can bring forth? This creative process demands that you stop seeking permission or validation from external authorities, whether religious institutions, social conventions, or cultural expectations, and instead develop what Nietzsche described as the sovereign individual, the person who possesses the right to make promises and the strength to keep them, who measures worth by their own standards rather than society's applause. The practical path forward involves what might be called existential craftsmanship, the daily practice of choosing what to affirm and what to reject, what to amplify and what to eliminate, consciously shaping your character through intentional action rather than drifting on the currents of circumstance. This requires the courage to experiment with different ways of being to make what psychologist Carl Rogers called authentic mistakes rather than inauthentic successes, to fail in ways that are true to yourself rather than succeed in ways that betray your potential. You become the author of your existence by developing what the ancient Greeks called phronesis, practical wisdom, the capacity to discern what constitutes a life worth living in your particular circumstances with your unique gifts and limitations, and then having the discipline to bring that vision into reality through consistent action. This authorship manifests not in grand gestures alone, but in the microscopic details of daily life, how you speak to others, how you work, how you handle disappointment, how you practice gratitude, how you confront suffering, each moment representing another brushstroke on the canvas of your becoming. The ultimate test of your authorship lies in your relationship with time, whether you live as what philosopher Martin Heidegger called awaiting, constantly postponing life until some future condition is met, or whether you practice what he termed anticipatory resoluteness,
embracing your finite existence and making each moment count as if it were simultaneously your first and last. To become the author of your existence is to recognize that the meaning of your life is not something you discover, but something you create through your choices, your actions, your relationships, and your response to suffering. And that this creative responsibility, while terrifying, represents the highest dignity of the human condition.
The culmination of Nietzsche's philosophical vision arrives in the form of the Übermensch, not a superior biological being or a tyrannical overlord, but a psychological and spiritual ideal representing the ultimate affirmation of life in its totality. This figure emerges as the creative response to nihilism, embodying the courage to stand before a meaningless universe and declare meaning not as something to be discovered, but as something to be created. The Übermensch does not transcend humanity through divine grace or supernatural intervention, but through a rigorous process of self-overcoming, shattering inherited values, embracing suffering as transformative, and wielding the hammer of critique to break illusions and rebuild existence from the ground up. This is not an escape from the human condition, but its fullest expression, a being who has looked into the abyss of a godless cosmos and instead of despairing, has chosen to dance. The Übermensch represents the fusion of artist, philosopher, and warrior, a creator who treats life as raw material to be shaped with intention, discipline, and imagination. Where the passive nihilist resigns to the belief that nothing matters, the Übermensch responds, "If nothing matters, then everything is permitted to the one bold enough to assign value." This is not moral relativism, but profound responsibility, the recognition that in the absence of divine decree, we must become the legislators of meaning, the poets of our own existence. The Übermensch embraces amor fati, the love of fate, not as passive acceptance, but as active reverence for all of life, its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and tragedies, understanding that depth, character, and greatness are forged in the crucible of contradiction and struggle. In our contemporary world, the call of the Übermensch is more urgent than ever. We live in an age of distraction, comfort, and avoidance, a culture that encourages us to anesthetize our pain, outsource our thinking, and seek validation through external metrics of success. The Übermensch rejects this diminishment, choosing instead to live with intensity, integrity, and a relentless commitment to self-creation. This is not a solitary or arrogant path, but one that requires engagement with the world. The Übermensch builds, inspires, and elevates others not through domination, but through example, showing what is possible when human potential is unleashed from the shackles of fear, convention, and dogmatic belief. To aspire toward the Übermensch is to undertake the most demanding and rewarding journey imaginable, to become a human being who needs no external authority to validate their worth, no promised afterlife to justify their actions, and no collective approval to affirm their path. It is to live so fully in the present, with such passion, creativity, and responsibility, that eternity is felt not as a future reward, but as the profound depth of the now. The Übermensch is Nietzsche's challenge to us. Will we remain trapped in the ruins of dead ideals, or will we dare to become the creators, the affirmers, the dancers, the ones who say yes to life again and again, not in spite of its suffering, but because of it?